Hello, Mr. President. Thank you for accepting this interview with 3 French and international stations. You'll be questioned by Christophe Boisbouvier from RFI. Hello. And David Delos from TV5 Monde. Hello, Mr. President. And Roselyne Febvre from France 24. So we'll be discussing France's foreign policy, especially in Africa, and we'll be talking at length on Mali and the Sahel region. Mr. President, terrorism, be it taking place in Sahel or anywhere else, it's a major concern for you, especially when it's in France. And we're seeing the emergence of a new generation of terrorists in Boston, London, or Paris, and they're called the lone wolves. So, Mr. President, what is their profile, these young people, and what instruments do our intelligence services have to fight this new type of terrorism?
First of all, thank you for this interview that allows us to discuss our country and the world, because what's happening in the world has consequences on events in our country. You mentioned terrorism. First and foremost, there's a threat that comes from outside. It's present, it's never ceased, and we must be of the utmost vigilance because there are conflicts. You cited in Africa, Mali, extending into the region around Mali, into Sahel, events in Syria, what happened in Libya. So there are threats. But there's also terrorism from within.
So an internal threat.
It's not new. The Mera affair really was a character, no doubt, with accomplices. We're trying to identify those who at some point goes on the attack. And so we're leaving no stone unturned. A tragic event occurred in London. That's not an isolated event. There's not necessarily a link with what happened in Paris, La Défense business district, where a soldier was attacked. But we're making sure that no information is passed up on. So every time there's some lead, every time there are gatherings or any individuals, we act.
But in La Défense, the business district, this person, Alexander, was registered and already looked at by the authorities. Is there not some failure there in the intelligence agency? The Homeland Security Minister, Manuel Valls, at the time referred to it as being an error.
Obviously, there's an investigation underway and conclusions will be drawn. Amongst those conclusions, there's the coordination of all the intelligence services and processing of all information. As regards the attacker of the soldier, obviously he was known as having a certain background, and of course, but from there to think that he could go on the attack, that's a different matter. He needed to be monitored, but he was apprehended very rapidly, and that now he's in the hands of the justice system.
Well, Manuel Valls refers to these individuals as weak signals. These are people who are self-made or homegrown radicals. How can we detect them and stop them?
Well, he mentions weak signals because these are individuals who are by definition isolated. They haven't gone on the attack or who don't act out gradually, but they can do so with radical action. It was the case in the La Défense business district, who thus far had not committed any attack on a soldier or a fellow citizen. So what we need is to have proper intelligence gathering systems and to monitor these networks that are formed, because sometimes it's just a handful of individuals who belong at a certain time to a group and want to go on the attack and create a tragic event. We see in London, because of course we're interacting with all intelligence services in Europe. In the case of London, there were many accomplices, because it's wrong to believe that these are always isolated acts. There's necessarily a setting.
So a terrorist organization behind them?
Not necessarily a terrorist organizations, but individuals who come together, who set up a number of projects and plans and then go on the attack at some point. And there's also, we see this each and every time, there are French nationals who travel to a number of theatres of operations, unfortunately, in Syria, Libya, and then return and can propagate a number of ideas and have had the experience in the handling of weapons. So we must be very vigilant, and that's what the government is doing.
In 2008, your predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy, dissolved the Domestic Intelligence Agency to be included in a broader agency, the DCRI. Now, do you think that information is not really getting up to as it should from the ground, as we saw in the Mera affair or the Business District affair? Should things not be reshuffled again?
Well, obviously, we need to improve our local intelligence gathering capability by the intelligence services. Obviously, I'm not going to go back on what was done. We're at a time when there's no need to undertake major reform or overhaul things. We need to improve our capability. And yesterday, what was a failure, that is, information that wasn't properly processed, must now be resolved. That is, each and every time local information about a particular individual can indeed be processed, it must be communicated to the intelligence service. At the same time, I've asked for better cooperation, and that's been achieved between the various intelligence departments, both domestic intelligence and external intelligence. Why? Because we see that there are individuals who go from within to the outside world and vice versa. So we need to improve this chain of coordination and ensure that it is clearly solidified.
Mr. President, on the 5th of June, you will be awarded the Houphouët-Boigny Prize for peace in Africa. We have French troops in Mali, have had for 5 months in Operation Serval. And one of your goals there, you've stated it, was to destroy the terrorists. Now, by intervening militarily, Mr. President, in Mali, have you not caused the opposite effect, in a way, by scattering or reactivating or displacing the terrorist activity? We saw this on the 23rd of May in Niger.
Now, the Serval operation had one single objective, which was to free Mali from the hold of terrorism. This was an objective that, even before the terrorists sought to conquer Bamako and the whole of Mali, because they occupied the northern part of Mali, that objective has been achieved, both militarily and in practical terms on the ground. That's to say, there's no single part of Mali that is under the control of terrorists. Now, have all these terrorists been neutralized? Many of them have, on the basis of the information we've received.
But they went somewhere.
Of course, some of these people went somewhere else. That somewhere else being southern Libya, but they have also dispersed, and we need to coordinate all the efforts of the neighboring countries that they wish to put in place. Now, so I consider this operation is a success, both militarily on the ground, and now it must be a political success. That is, there will be elections in Mali, a dialogue will be initiated with the authorities there, and the situation of Mali's security will be guaranteed through the intervention of the UN, which will be replacing that of France and African countries. That's a good thing. Have we, for all that, seen an end to the terrorist threat in Sahel? No, because we've seen an attack in Niger, in Arlit, and in a town in Niger with very serious consequences in terms of the number of people killed, unfortunately. Now, of course, here it's a matter of Africa to ensure its own security and fight terrorism.
Last week in Addis Ababa, you suggested a summit on African peace and security that would be held in December in Paris, but your African counterparts were less enthusiastic. Some considered it a convocation. Could it not be a bit paternalistic?
No, not at all. It's what we can do so that Africans assume their own security. This has been my position since I was elected as head of state. I stated in Dakar that This was an end to the relationships between France and Africa. Africans must assume their own defense, including against terrorism. That doesn't mean that France will pull out altogether. Over and above what we're already doing for the economy, for development, we must contribute support to Africa's security. And that's the point of the meeting that was already planned, in fact, because there was a meeting scheduled between France and African countries at the end of the year, and I wanted to give a theme to that, which is peace and security. And the Africans have understood that fully, because what do they want? They don't want France to act as the policeman in their stead. That would be a bad thing for the image of France, and it would be unacceptable for Africans. But we want to make sure that African armies, with the framework that African heads of state wish to give either the African Union or regional organizations, so that African armies are trained, supervised and equipped so that they can fight terrorism, because today that's the prime threat. France will therefore be at their side.
Well, how will France be at their side? Are you considering training African soldiers? Are you considering financial aid? Or would you be considering weapons, arming an intervention organization that the African Union would like to have?
You're right, the African Union is stating that it wished to equip itself with an intervention force, and I fully agree with that approach. Now, France, in fact, not just France, Europe, yesterday I was with Angela Merkel and I informed her of my initiative. She agrees with it, so France and Europe and all countries that wish to follow us will form this African Intervention Task Force. And I mean, it can be the African Union, it'll also be as part of ECOWAS for Western Africa, it can be in Central Africa too, but it's the Africans themselves who will provide the answer, and depending on their answer, we'll adapt our support.
Now, have these resources been evaluated? Because if you look at the training efforts involved in the African armies, you see the debacle of the Malian forces against the terrorists. You get the impression that it doesn't really work.